Hi everyone, welcome back to Economics is for Everyone, and today we are still on theory and we're going to be jumping into what I call microeconomics, well in fact what a lot of people call microeconomics. So if you recall from our previous unit, I defined the differences between microeconomics and macroeconomics, and today I'm going to be focusing on several different microeconomic theories. So before I jump into that, just a quick reminder of what microeconomics is all about. Microeconomics focuses on the individual, whether that be the individual firm or the individual person, and the decisions that they make. So you'd be out there trying to maximize utility, if you remember that. Firms would be out there trying to maximize their revenue or minimize their costs, maximize their profits. So that is from their perspective. So we're looking at this very focused approach, which is the opposite from macroeconomics. So a lot of what we covered so far has actually been microeconomics. And this will be our last unit focused on microeconomics and anything relating to microeconomics. Also bear in mind though, a lot of the micro stuff I taught before actually also relates to macro as well, as it leads into that macroeconomic stuff that I'm going to be talking about in the next 2 units. So if you remember your market structure, that is pretty much very much focused on microeconomics, but I haven't put it under microeconomics because I wanted it to have its own unit, because market structure is so significant in its influence on demand and supply and your whole pricing and quantity and all of that stuff, which eventually feeds into your macro. So that's why I pulled that out to make it a bit different. But today I've got a whole load of different theories I'm going to be sort of very briefly covering. So I think they're fairly important things, so let's get going. Opportunity costs. Anyone heard of that? Well, it's a very interesting concept, because people normally think about costs themselves. You know, you go and buy a banana, what's the cost to you? How much a banana cost? 20 pence, 20 cents, or what currency are you using? But opportunity cost doesn't look at that. Opportunity cost, well I suppose it does in a way, but opportunity cost is more focused on what we call what you are forgoing. You know, for example, you could be, let's say you have, I don't know, 50 pence. You could buy the banana or you could buy the orange. So it's not so much the 50 pence you're foregoing, but it's the orange you're foregoing, because you've made a decision that you're going to buy some sort of fruit. And opportunity cost can be expanded to practically everything and every decision that we make, because whatever you do, you are foregoing some other opportunity. As I mentioned before about going to Rome, if you're going to have, you know, you've got 2 weeks off work, you decide how you want to spend that. You could go to Rome, or you could go to Paris. You can even do both, but again, it's the cost of spending less time in terms of opportunity in each of those places. So opportunity cost, I think, is a really good way of looking at it. It doesn't just look at things in terms of dollars and cents, but it's looking at how you're spending your time, in a sense of what are you giving up with that limited amount of time that you have. That what we call that scarce amount of time. Which brings me to the next subject, scarcity. And scarcity is typically taught at the beginning of most economic courses. I've left it a little bit later because I do not consider scarcity to be the core economic problem. I see scarcity more from the point of view that scarcity affects your demand and supply in particular. So if you've got a resource that is particularly scarce, then there's a limited supply, and that limited supply is going to raise your price and lower the quantity available to things. So that brings us to an example, for example, of water and diamonds. For example, water is very valuable to us. We can't live without water, am I correct? Yet diamonds, no one really needs diamonds. But which, you know, if you're going to buy something, what's going to cost you more money? What's got a higher price? It's diamonds. And that's simply because of scarcity. Interesting enough, there's not that many diamonds in the world, but there's plenty of water all around us. So even though that's essential for us to live, the price of diamonds are higher simply because of this scarcity. I talk about scarcity quite a bit in my Steemit blog, and I've got something what I call contrived scarcity compared to natural scarcity. I'm not going to jump in that today, but if you want to know more about scarcity, and I cover it off in about 4 fairly detailed posts, I recommend that you go to my Steemit page and look into more detail on that. Anyway, what have we got next? Externalities. That's another very important economic concept. So what is externalities? Okay, for example, you imagine you're a smoker. Okay, so you go to a shop, you buy some cigarettes, you pay them, I don't know, £5 for your packet of cigarettes, you start smoking them and you're enjoying them or whatever. Okay, so that is the negotiation between you and the seller, right? You agree on a price, you agree on a quantity, etc., etc. But there's other people that not necessarily like smoking. And we have second-hand smokers, for example, that are taking in your toxic fumes. They don't like it, so that is an externality to them. And we call that a third party, and that's your third party effect of externalities. Oh, well, externalities and a lot of other things as well. It's like the guy playing his music in the middle of the night. He loves the music, you might hate it, and it's keeping you awake. So that's a cost to you. So that's yet another negative externality. We also have what we call positive externalities. And we can see that in the saw in terms of like your neighbours. They've got a wonderful, beautiful garden, they keep it looking great. You're really happy, you look out your window and say, wow, you get a great view, a wonderful garden. And to you that makes you happy, and it's better than seeing a really awful looking garden or maybe nothing there at all. So you've gained from that. So that's a positive externality. Another example would be your open source projects, where people are basically sharing their information, their knowledge, their research, and it helps basically everyone or all the firms within that particular industry to grow a lot faster. And that's because firms are sharing their information. Not all firms do that, and that's why, in the sense that we have not as much open source as we'd like. And that's a problem with externalities, is that the bad stuff, it's overproduced, and the good stuff is underproduced, because there's a misalignment, basically. It's like, for example, the bad stuff, the costs are not factored. So if you have lower costs than what they should be, you would produce more, for example. And then the good stuff, you know, for example, the open source stuff, for example, there's not enough of that because the people are not necessarily rewarded for doing that extra work. So you have that unbalance, I guess, and a few solutions are thrown about that. But anyway, I talk a little bit too long on that, I think. Like I said, if you want to read more about externalities, I've got a post out on my Steemit blog that actually explains a little bit more. Alright, another one I want to talk about, and a topic that I really enjoy, and that is game theory. You ever heard of game theory? Well, it's often not taught in your more intra-economic courses, but I think it's pretty important, because it's about how you make decisions in relation to other people, and that's what I've been talking about before. It's not just you need to understand, you need to understand other people and other people's reactions and responses. And what's good about game theory is it encourages sometimes both cooperation and competition. So in terms of competition, for example, you're competing for someone for something, and you need to know, basically you've got to predict what they're going to do so you can respond accordingly and get the better outcome for yourself. In terms of the cooperation side of things as well, that's interesting too, because cooperation, if you understand game theory, you realise that cooperating can actually benefit multiple partners, and that's an advantage of game theory too. So I just want to talk about 3 games very, very quickly. I've written posts again on my Steemit blog that goes a lot more detail about them, but the games are, we got Battle of the Sexes, Chicken Game, and Prisoner's Dilemma. So what is a Prisoner's Dilemma? I think that's one of the most famous ones. That is where you have 2 people been arrested, and it's an advantage to actually dob in the other person, because then if you, as I say, confess whatever, then you can get off and the other person goes to prison. And likewise, if the other person does that to you, then you get thrown in prison. But if you both confess, then you both go to prison. And both going to prison, funny enough, in Prisoner's Dilemma is the optimal outcome, where in reality you would get a better outcome if both of them refuse to give any information whatsoever. They might get harassed by the police for a while, but in the end they'll be let off if there's no evidence based on that. And that's what the Prisoner's Dilemma is all about, and that involves cooperation, as I mentioned earlier. It's one of the cooperation games. Another one is what we call the Battle of the Sexes. That is simply set out as you have a boy and a girl who want to go on a date. And this is, assume that we have a lack of communication, it's rather funny. They can either choose to go to the same thing, or they could go to different things. But there's an activity that the boy likes more than the girl, and there's an activity a girl likes more than the boy. So should they go together to the activity the boy likes more, or should they go to the activity the girl likes more, or should they go on their separate way? And again, this is a cooperation game, and I think the best outcome is that they sometimes do the thing that the boy likes and sometimes do the thing that the girl likes, rather than just swinging in one particular direction, because in the end, someone, well, ends up getting upset and the whole thing falls apart. So that's your battle of the sexes. And the last one is the chicken game. So we talked about two games that encourage cooperation. Chicken game is more of a competitive game. And that's about, have you heard about the two cars driving towards each other? One swerves and the other one doesn't. So the person who swerves is the loser and the winner is the person who keeps on going. But if everyone keeps to their same strategy, they collide, basically, and everyone dies. So how do you win this game? You win this game by being able to show commitment to a certain particular decision, that you're committed to going down one path. And if the other person knows that you've got that level of commitment, then they have no choice but to swerve, other than you get a disaster and crash. And swerving is in fact a better outcome than crashing, if you look at it that way. So that's what we call the chicken game. So you have two games that encourages cooperation, one that encourages a competitive strategy. But that's game theory, and there's a lot more to that, and I've written many posts about game theory as well, but that's just a brief introduction to game theory. Alright, that takes us to the end of, I think this is our last micro session of microeconomics. I hope you enjoyed it. I particularly like microeconomics, that's more my sort of thing, but you know, not everyone does. And the next two sessions, next two units, is going to be focused on macroeconomics. So you guys that know more into the macro type of thing, want to know more about the world. We've neglected that to this point in time, but don't worry. 2 units full of macro theory to keep you happy. Alright, have a great day and remember to have a little go at those questions, okay? See ya!